Greetings, chess fans. My name is Arturs Neiksans. I'm the leading Latvian chess grandmaster, and this video is the latest episode of my bootcamps. Very unique video series where, in the span of a couple of hours, I typically explain some deeper concepts in chess. Should it be some popular openings, the middle game strategy, or the endgame finesse? And this already is the episode number 48. Now, all of us, obviously, we know that Daniel Naroditsky, also known as Danya among friends and chess fans, he tragically passed away at the fall of 2025. And to ensure that his legacy lives on, Charlotte Chess Center has established Daniel Naroditsky Memorial Fund with two initiatives. The initiative number one is to have a scholarship in his name and allow some of the most brightest chess talents in the United States to receive proper funding and ensure that Danya's goals and legacy lives on. But also there's the second initiative, which is Daniel's Memorial Tournament, which will be held this July. So that's why with this video, I would like to pay my tribute to one of the most interesting theoretical contributions that Danya did to the opening theory, which is the Naroditsky's four knights variation. I'm talking about e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, knight c3, knight f6, and knight e5, which looks a bit odd, but Daniel played this and popularized this mostly in online blitz games with a great success. So that's why this variation already bears the name of the Naroditsky variation. Before I proceed with the theoretical part, what's going to be in this bootcamp and on which variations we're going to focus, I would like to start with two important announcements. The announcement number one is, of course, as usual, there will be a PGN for the bootcamp, especially for the latest episodes that I have created. The PGN, this is the source file that I use to create the bootcamp, and it will be available for a separate purchase. Obviously, you don't have to get it. It's for those who want to have a bit more deeper understanding and maybe analyze the lines themselves. But all of the profits that I will receive from selling the PGN, I will donate straight to the Daniel Naroditsky Memorial Fund, which is still running for about 6 weeks. If I'm not terribly mistaken, the donations are open until the 1st May. So in case you want to support Daniel, his legacy, you like my content, and you would like to get your hands on the PGN, consider purchasing it, and I will make sure that the funds are transferred to his memorial fund. This is the first announcement, and the second announcement is that his memorial, the Rapid and Blitz tournament, the inaugural edition, will take place this July in Charlotte from the 3rd to 5th July. And I have already decided that I will participate there myself as well. All right, that being said, let's start with the core ideas and the structure of the bootcamp. The bootcamp will be in several parts. We are going to talk about some of the most important systems from the Black's perspective, and typically I have 6 parts. 6 main continuations from Black's perspective, what Black typically does, how Daniel typically responds, and also occasionally I will be providing my improvements, because Daniel, obviously, from time to time, he would check what he played in the four knights variations and make some adjustments, but sometimes I would feel that I would take a bit of different direction. So the variation of knight e5, it has been around for quite some long time, but it has not established itself as a very serious continuation. But I think especially in the accelerated time control format, it is a great weapon because Daniel himself was a fantastic speeches player, and having such an element of surprise so early in the opening phase would give him definitely some edge when it comes to the extra time, and then he would either outplay his opponents in very dynamic chess or just flag, yeah, because this is part of the online chess. And I have to admit, before I was working on this bootcamp episode, I quite did not know Danya's playing style. And now I remember watching some of Danya's streams. Do you know what was his subscription animation when somebody subscribed to him on Twitch? It was Michael Tal's picture. And by watching Danya playing the four knights variation with knight e5, I definitely could feel that he was heavily influenced by Michael Tal's legacy, because he essentially tried to recreate his playing style and get very dynamic games. And also in the PGN, I will include all the analysis. Again, please don't be mistaken, it's not a full course, it's just my analysis based on Daniel's games. I also make some improvements whenever I could, and also included some of the best games that Danya played online. All right, so that being said, I would just like to show you one game before we proceed with the theoretical phase. This is the game that Danya played against Jan Nepomniachtchi in August of 2025, and Nepomniachtchi obviously is a world championship challenger twice, right? So he's one of the best players in the world. Here, Nepomniachtchi played bishop c5, Danya played c3. This is a gambit. We're going to talk about it in the bootcamp. What happens if black accepts? Here, Jan decided not to do it. He played shoot castle, d3, threatening some bishop g5 stuff. Black played h6. And very characteristic for the Danya's four knights. White takes an f6, and says, I can go for king set attack with g4. You might be looking at this and thinking, wait a second, this is coffee chess. Well, actually, if you switch on the engine favors white after g4. And it just creates some very interesting imbalances. White is threatening to play g5, expose the king, threatening to play rook g1, and if necessary, castle the long side. Nepomniachtchi responded d5, which seems to be the most principal way to play. g5, takes, bishop g5, queen d6, and rook g1, just like that. So we're going to talk about this particular setup in the respective part. By the way, d takes on e4 is not good because of knight e2. And suddenly comes knight e4, queen h5, and immediately a killing attack. Can you imagine this? And instead here, Nepomniachtchi played knight e7. Danya played knight e2, threatening to play something like queen h5. Nepo played knight g6. There are a couple of inaccuracies, obviously, along the way, but again, we have to remember this was a blitz game. Queen f3, threatening the pawn on d5, c6, and h4. And suddenly black is in a deep trouble, right? So obviously, Nepomniachtchi himself being a very dynamic player, he decided to try to take over the game. Somehow he played a 5, makes perfect sense. E takes, C takes, there comes h5. White's about to play h6 and expose the black king. The long castle is also in the cards. Nepo played e4, queen g2. Suddenly there's a very powerful battery to g-file. Knight h8, d4, bishop e6. And it feels that black is sort of safe because there's no immediate way for white to get to the pawn on g7. Black can always play rook f7. He's going to normalize things and everything's going to be good. You know what Naroditsky played in this position? Knight c4. I mean, and I saw so many games like this played by Danya. Meaning it's a sacrifice, the knight is heading to e5 if black doesn't accept. Nepo accepted, king h7, there comes bishop f4, threatening with a checkmate. Queen f6, there comes bishop e5. Queen e7, and it seems, oh, queen g7, it's not a big deal. Takes the king h6 and black is surviving. How about queen sacrifice. Queen g6 check, takes, takes. If king h8, there's rook h1 checkmate. King h6, bishop f4, queen g5, rook g5. Now it's material balance on the board, but black is losing material. Nepomniachtchi resigned. So, like, dismantling one of the best players in the world like this, in a crushing style. This was Danya. And he used the 4 knights variation. All right. Let me start with the first part. And we're going to talk about the knight takes on e4 variation. Just a second. There we go. So, like I already said, there will be 6 parts. So in the first part, we're going to deal with the most popular response from black. Obviously, after knight e5 and knight takes on e4, we have to check it. But before I proceed, I feel like I have to mention that the Naroditsky variation, it shares some resemblance to the Belgrade variation. And the Belgrade variation starts with d4, e takes on d4, and knight e5. Meaning, white sacrifices the pawn on e4, and after knight takes on e4, we play bishop d3, and we would transpose to the Naroditsky's variation. Actually, it's debatable. If this is still Naroditsky's variation or it's still the Belgrade variation, it doesn't really matter. But the point is, Danya was definitely well aware that knight e5 only serves as initial shock, element of surprise, and if black knows knight b4, then white has no advantage here. No tricks, really. And I pushed the line a bit deeper. This is the best that you can do from the white's perspective. Bishop d3, should castle. White is still getting a decent game, but if black is not much in the mood, he can play knight e5, give up the pawn on d4, and he just has an equal game. Danya was advocating knight e5 and offering to take the pawn on e4, very often sacrificing the pawn to get some sort of swift initiative. And we're going to start with knight takes on e4. By the way, the lines I'm looking at is knight e4, knight e5, bishop c5, a bishop e7, d6, maybe bishop d6 as well. Yeah, I think it was actually more than 6. Anyway, let's start with knight takes on e4. We played e4. And here, black already needs to make a pretty big decision. Because clearly, it's very tempting to accept the pawn, right? E takes on d4. It's a risky choice, but it's playable. If we listen to Stockfish, Danya would normally play bishop d3. And black pretty much has only one good move here, which is knight c5. Because if he tries something else, if he tries to play, for example, knight f6, this is a typical problem. We need to check. You just can't properly cover from the check, meaning bishop e7, white takes on f6, and ruin your king's safety. G takes on f6, should castle, and black cannot castle short. I mean, if he castles short, it's just immediately game over. Queen e4 and just a mate on the board. d6, rook e1, black is still stuck in the center. Bishop e6. So here in one game where Danya was playing against the username Legend is back, it's probably a very strong GM with an idea to play queen e7 along castle, bishop e5, knight e4, takes, queen f3, and white developed a very strong initiative. So after d5, as you can see, black is still up a pawn, but his king has nowhere really to go. The long side is dangerous, the short side is dangerous, and at least according to Stockfish, white enjoys a large advantage. Now instead of this, black typically plays knight c5. I think also f5 just makes no sense in these positions, and most of Danya's opponents, they would avoid playing f5 because when you castle the short side, the king already feels quite exposed. So I'm just going to show you some flashy line here. Should castle bishop e7 and bishop c4. Already here you can feel that black is in big trouble. So he cannot castle short side because there's going to be discovered check by the bishop. And if black attempts to get rid of the bishop with something like knight a5, I mean, don't ask for invitation, just sacrifice a piece. Knight e4, knight f5, this is an attack to the bishop. Queen e2, and black is just completely blown off the board. He can't do this. That's why typically black in this position, he will play knight c5. And normally here, Daniel will play shoot castle. But occasionally he would also try to play queen e2 check. And there were some totally mind-boggling games that he played. For example, against Tani Adavumi, there was this one game, bishop e7, bishop g5, pinning the bishop, knight e6, h4, going for a long castle, sacrificing the bishop on g5. According to an engine, none of this works, but when you're playing a 3-minute blitz game, go figure it out. Or after knight e6, short castle, here, white sacrifices. I mean, white already has sacrificed the second pawn, but he just opens up the position like this. Here, rook e1, d6, queen e4, and just goes for this swift initiative. Like this. And yeah, I mean, when you're going to be playing this line, you're going to see there's definitely room for a lot of exciting lines. For example, after knight takes on d3, how about queen f6? Casually. So bishop takes on f6, knight takes on f6, black gonna take it, that's gonna be a mate on e8, and it ends up with some spectacular lines where unfortunately black is better. Yeah, so that's essentially the risk for white, because white, according to Stockfish, is in these sharp lines sometimes worse, but in a very limited time that people normally get in blitz games, typically the defender doesn't have the time to figure out all of these things. That being said, I think that the 4 knights variation, the Naroditsky variation, can be played also possibly in some classical time controls, but I'm not really sure at what level, what is the highest level, because ultimately white is not worse anywhere. So if you know your stuff on, even if black plays everything correctly, it's about an equal position. So there's not really a lot of risk. There's also, at the same time, a lot of reward. But normally Daniel will play shoot castle. And here, for example, black will play knight e6, which is the most accurate move, rook e1. Here was one game by Danya against Alireza Firouzja. Alireza was, this already I think is pretty known fact, Danya was his second during the, was it the Grand Swiss, I think? So knight e7, bishop g5, c6. This was one of the blitz games they played. And after knight f4, knight h5, white develops very, very dangerous initiative. So again, I don't think it even feels that white is down 2 pawns. You just have to be a bit patient here. Black has major problems with development. For example, bishop e7 already is a losing move because of knight e4, takes on g6, takes on g7, queen d4, and black can say goodbye to his position because knight e6 is a killing threat. So this is one line that black could do. Or black could also try to play something like h6, stopping some bishop g5, knight g5 stuff. And it just leads to something like this, where white plays first bishop d2, then plays c3 to give the bishop some long diagonal. And maybe black has to sell back already some of the extra material. We reject it, and it's something like this. Yeah, I don't know what is this. Stockfish says it's about balanced. But I think that from the practical perspective, black's position already feels quite difficult to play, especially in the 3-minute time control. If black here plays bishop e7, this is actually a small inaccuracy. White plays rook e1, and this allows white immediately to carry out some spectacular shots. For example, if black plays a short castle, you're immediately thinking, oh, there might be a Greek gift, something on h7. Indeed, this is the case also here. We take on e7, we sacrifice on h7, we play knight g5. If king g8, there's going to be queen h5. King g6 is the only way to survive for the time being, and white just develops a terrific attack. Some kind of a discovered check. f4, the queen goes back to g4, or king f6, queen h4, and black just loses the knight on c5, and white keeps the terrific attack. So again, this is not a good line for black. Obviously, it's just dead lost. And the black plays something like 96. Most people will play like this against Danya in this position. And here Naroditsky will play typically c3. But I think that there's no need to rush with this move. I think that bishop d2 also looks very interesting. And in a couple of games, Daniel did play something like this because, like I already said, from time to time he was making some adjustments to his games. He would analyze the games, obviously, and then come up with some improvements. And here the idea is to play b4, b5, push back the knight, put the knight on e5, play queen h5, and just play like true AlphaZero. a6, a4, and it just leads to some lines where black already has to give up the at least one pawn, and white just has a fantastic compensation here. Two bishops, beautiful dynamics, f5, bishop b4. So from a practical standpoint, black's position is very difficult to play. Stockfish favors white. That's what you should know already here. But Danya typically would play not bishop d2, he will play c3, which also kind of makes sense. And the entire approach, it sometimes feels like some sort of a Evans gambit, takes, and if black plays a short castle, there's bishop c2 with queen d3. For example, there was a couple of games that Danya played against Vidit Santosh Gujarati, one of the strongest Indian grandmasters, well rated over 2700 elo. And there were a couple of games like this. Check this out. Queen e3, g6, bishop h6, c4. And for black, again, it's very difficult to play. Check this out. Bishop f8 is bishop g5. You can't take it. There's going to be rook e8 and knight f6. A lot of tactical tricks. And after bishop e7, takes. White can already take the exchange, but Danya's looking for more. Queen c3 with knight f6 check with a simply winning position. This was one game they played. Another game was like this. Rook e8, c4, and here Vidit played knight b4, attempting to trade off this knight on d5. And here Danya went for slightly flawed idea because, again, it was still a blitz game, but he had the correct idea. And the correct continuation was, again, bishop takes on h7, king h7, and knight e5. I mean, it just looks so beautiful here. The threat is queen h5, queen f7, rook e3, rook h3 with a checkmate, and black is just not surviving this. So rook e3 comes with rook h3, black is already making the only moves, and look at this, knight c6. It's really spectacular. The queen leaves, there's going to be knight e7, and the black loses the queen, so he would have to figure out that the best one is knight h3. I think it's basically impossible to find this move, and according to an engine, white is much better. King f2, rook g1, the attack still continues, and white has some material advantage. So these are a couple of lines that happen if black decides to accept the pawn. Yeah. Let me go back a bit. So e takes on d4, bishop d3, it's just very dangerous for black. And that's why black typically, he would try to do something else. And the other real move is only d6. There's knight f6 is just bad. You take on d5, white is just better. I mean, the lines are very easy. You go for a long castle. Also, black tries to play it as with the Belgrade gambit, this knight b4. The trick is, here you just take on b4. You don't take on e5 immediately, because if you do, suddenly there's this bishop b4 check, c3, knight c3. It complicates the game a bit too much. But after knight b4, you can just take it and play c3, because now for black to play knight c3 and bishop c3, your two minor pieces will just dominate the board. And in the end, you get something like this, where it just feels like it's a great version of the Petrov from the white's perspective. So we have traded a couple of knights, and black doesn't have this typical pressure against the pawn on e5, knight c6, etc. That's why black here really has only one continuation, which is d6, which is also very human. And here comes bishop b5. And after bishop b5, for black, it's surprisingly difficult to make the right move. And engine initially gives black some advantage for pretty much strictly one line. And everything else, there's a lot of tactical tricks. So let me show you. For example, if black plays bishop d7, here Danya normally will play short castle, which I'm not really sure it's ideal. And his idea was, if black plays, for example, bishop e7, rook e1, here, takes, and suddenly black has problems. Like, check this out. Takes, here, and bishop takes on f3 leads nowhere, because we can take on f6, take on e7, take on c7, and black is just close to lost. So he can't do this. And if instead of this, black will take with the knight, we take with e5, black gonna take on b5, we're gonna take with f6 and completely ruin his king side. The king is always gonna be in trouble. He has to take it. Bishop c4, keeping the tension. The pawn is under attack. e4 is gonna be knight g5, there's an attack. And it just leads to some unpleasant position for black, meaning you can already take the pawn on e4, but b3 is much more unpleasant, with bishop b2 or bishop a3 pinning the knight, and also the queen potentially cannot move. And this is literally the best that black can do in this position, and white is better. Because of two bishops, the pawn is going to fall. You can maybe take on f6, play knight e4, and black's pawn structure is just terrible. Let's go back. Also, instead of bishop e7, pretty human move is knight f6. Now comes bishop g5. And typically in these positions, Naroditsky would take on e7. The point is, knight e7, take on e5, play queen e2, it really becomes pretty clear that the black won't be able to protect the pawn on e5. And it just gives white a pretty significant advantage. And we already have recovered the sacrifice material. And queen takes on e7 maybe is a bit more stubborn, but rook e1, long castle. And Danya had several games in the setup, maybe with slightly different move orders, but being down a pawn. And here, according to an engine, white has an advantage. Because we can go for a queen set attack, meaning we can play d5, knight b8. And I think Danya played c4 in the game, but bishop f1 is very effective. Retract the bishop, bishop e3, and just start pushing the pawns at the queen side. It's very easy. Typically, after knight g4, the bishop surprisingly stands well on a7, and the black attempts to trap it. There comes b4, c5. Engine says, what is winning? Yeah, black has an extra pawn, healthy extra pawn in the center, but again, because of the exposed king, his chances are pretty bad. But there's a problem with the entire setup with this short castle, is that black has the best move, knight e7, which could be quite difficult to spot, especially in blitz or rapid. And the point is that tactics no longer work because black plays c6 and he starts to push back white's pieces. You recover the pawn, but after d5, black is doing really well. I mean, obviously, the game still continues, but that's why I think that instead of the short castle, queen e2 is very interesting. Maybe ultimately it doesn't really matter. When Danya would go for short castle, I would look in the direction of queen e2, maybe a long castle is going to be an opportunity. Push back the knight, because again, f5, it just completely exposes the king. Think about some bishop c4 stuff, and it just doesn't feel quite right. Knight f6, we pin the knight. And there's some forcing lines like takes. We are about to make a long castle, make some very unpleasant pin here. Knight e5, black gonna take with the bishop, obviously, that's gonna be a pin. Take, a long castle. So black already is trying to barely stay in the game. Takes, f4. Black cannot keep the pawn, he has to cast short, and we can take the pawn on e5 with an equal game, maybe slightly better, but perhaps there's a room for some initiative. Rook d3, queen g4, queen f5, rook g3, rook h3, no risk for white whatsoever. We're down a pawn, but you're still having some attacking chances. So this is what I would recommend. And this is what happens after bishop d7. The other move is, for example, if black plays knight f6 immediately, goes back. And you're not winning a piece immediately here because you would think I can take and play d5, but it's not winning a piece because of a6 and b5. So this resource is quite important to know. And after knight f6, I recommend to play bishop g5. I really don't remember, did Danya get any games here? I think he did. But also I thought that c4 is looking very interesting to keep the tension in the center. According to an engine, this position is just about level. But after bishop g5, it seems that black has to play bishop e7. Again, we take the bishop, queen e7, play short castle, and it leads to this position pretty much by force, where after rook e1, black has problems to defend the pawn on e5, and his pawn structure is quite ruined. Meaning e4 is going to be queen d4, very important idea, threaten take knight, eliminate the pawn, black cannot keep the extra pawn. And if he plays bishop g4, queen d3, again the pawn is under attack, and it goes pretty much by force, this endgame. That's the best that black can do. Here, very important, rook e4 with down a pawn on the rook endgame, but I have a feeling if somebody's playing this for the win, it's only white. Because black has multiple double pawns, they're not marching forward, just make a window for your king, rook e3, rook c3, rook a3. From a practical standpoint, this position is so much easier to play with a white. Let's go back a bit. And instead of bishop e7, instead of knight f6 and bishop d7, there's also bishop e7, and here it's a mistake. And if black wants to play bishop e7, he has to include a6, bishop a4, and then play bishop e7, because now if black does this, you can just take it. There's the d5 idea, and after a6, bishop d3, you see black is simply losing material. He can't do this. Ultimately, this leads to the main line, and that's why I think you're also going to find that it's very easy to learn. Black plays a6, obviously we retreat, bishop a4, and once again, black has some choices. And I'm going to start with this flashy one. I just love this line. Bishop e6. It looks very logical. So black is pushing back the knight on d5, he wants to play b5, hold the pawn. But can you imagine? A bishop e6 is a big mistake. And it's not what you think. We play c4, and suddenly black realizes in this position it's very difficult to make the next move. Because if he plays either knight f6 or bishop e7, you just take it and play d5. Now what? That's why typically black will play b5. Here comes bishop c2, hitting the knight. Again, you can't play knight f6, there's going to be capture on d5. This part makes sense. Black plays f5. Should castle. Now what? You still cannot castle short. Bishop e7 is going to be a capture on d5 to follow. It's got to be bx on c4, right? What's wrong with the position? And here comes the shocking move. Bishop a4, hitting the knight. Black takes, and after d takes on e5, white is down so much material, except white is winning. 3 players at Chess.com rated over 3,100 fell for this. So I think the chances are that your opponents, they're going to fall for this. They're very, very high. Check this out. So d takes on e5, knight takes on e5. Knight takes on c6 is a big problem. Queen d6 makes sense. Knight c6. There's a threat of discovered check. King f7. There comes bishop f4. Queen f4, queen d5, followed by knight e8. He's immediately lights out for black. I think this was Danya's couple of games against Christopher Yu, if I remember correctly. And after queen c5, there's a very spectacular win. Knight e5 check, knight e7, hitting the queen, and bishop c7. That's it. Queen c7, queen d5 is just a mate on the board. Queen d2, takes, and black is just losing material. Yeah, this was Danya essentially at his finest, dismantling 3,100s on chess.com. So bishop e6 already is a mistake. The other moves that black could do is maybe play bishop d7, which feels very human. And again, here Danya would normally play shoot castle. I'm about to recommend queen e2. And after the shoot castle, Danya's idea was that after knight f6, there's bishop g5. Again, same idea, knight e7, here, rook e1. And white is about to win back the pawn with takes and takes with some annoying pins. And after the long castle, do you remember? We talked about this position. d5, knight b8, and c4. Again, white starts this queenside attack, except the bishop is not on f1. Here it's on a4, but what does it matter? Engine still likes your position. Let's say h6, retreat with the bishop, and it just goes to something like this. Where, okay, black is not in trouble, but white's game is so much easier, and engine tends to favor white's position a bit more. Just push those pawns aggressively forward at the queenside. If black would play instead bishop e7, Danya will play here, rook e1, knight f6, and here, I think that Danya again typically would take on e7. This was his typical approach, but I think d takes on e5 is just good. Knight takes on d5 does not work because of e takes on d6, very important intermezzo move, and black is just left with a major weakness on d5, and now we just play the game positionally. That's why black doesn't really have a choice. Takes, rook e5. And it kind of looks a bit scary because the knight on d5 is a bit pinned and the rook on e7 could be loose. But all you need to know is that Stockfish loves the position. Knight takes on d5 is the only move for black, and then black just plays a worse position. His king is in trouble because c6 runs into surprising b3 and bishop a3. And black is even in a greater trouble. So probably this is still just good, but I would like to show my alternative. Instead of the shoot castle, I liked queen e2. And I felt that if black plays knight f6, we have some similar lines, except now I will have a chance to castle alongside. Here, take on f6, take on e5, take on e5. Black doesn't really have a great choice. Long castle is a very annoying pin. And yeah, queen e3, black has to like literally walk a tightrope here to survive, and we still get an endgame where we're slightly pressing. Yeah, maybe Danya's move is a bit more interesting, so I was obviously using the engine and trying to find some continuations that are worthy alternatives. And in black instead, he doesn't play knight f6, he plays a 5. This is quite risky once again. Short castle, knight e4, yeah, engine here is fearless and says that this is okay for black, but I don't know, it just feels a bit inhuman. Again, chess is very concrete, queen e8 concretely works, and even in this position, we're down a pawn, but with the full compensation for the missing pawn because the black king is exposed and we are going to open up the queen side very quickly, right? All right, let's go back a bit, and instead of bishop d7, black could play bishop e7. Now you cannot play knight e7 and b5 because there's going to be b5 idea. This is why a6 bishop a4 for black was important to include. And here we play queen e2, hitting the knight. And if black plays knight f6, you immediately secure yourself the better position. Takes, takes, and takes. That's it. So black is just left with some weaknesses in the position. Okay, we have obstacle bishops on the board, but black's position is just worse. And instead, if black plays f5, I think Danya here was playing something else. If I'm not terribly mistaken, this was my recommendation, which is queen c4, hitting the knight, also stopping black from castling short. And after bishop d7, there's suddenly bishop b3. And how do you stop knight b6 threat with queen f7 checkmate? It's very difficult because bishop e6 runs into knight takes on c7. So I think the most human move would be something like rook f8, stopping the knight jumps. But after the shoot castle, black still needs to make a move. It's very difficult to make the move because b5 is going to be queen e2, white's initiative continues. The king has no safe place to go. And according to an engine, the best that black can do is still play this bishop e6. And you carry out this threat, and black is worse. All right. This is after, yeah, bishop e7. Well, maybe knight f6, go back with the knight. And typically in these positions, there's also one common maneuver, which is knight b4, pinning the knight on c6. And after bishop d7, again, you have a better middle game. Like you take on c6, you take on e5, and here it's a bit more accurate not to take on e5 immediately. You start with queen e2, and if black plays bishop d6, you gain back the pawn, and black once again is suffering. You have the bishop pair. This is a major weakness, so you have the better chances in the middle game. Now let's go to the main line. After bishop a4, the main continuation for black is to play b5. Kind of makes sense, push back the bishop. We play bishop b3. But now he has to pretty much make the move knight a5, which looks a bit scary because he leaves the pawn in e5 for free to take. And if black will play bishop e7, this is also a trick that Danya would try to carry out from time to time, meaning you can get the bishop on d5 at the right moment. For example, you can take on e7 immediately. Black has to deal with bishop d5 with knight e7, and you're just better after d takes on e5. So bishop e7 is quite not a serious move. Maybe bishop b7 is a bit better. But now black is a bit underdeveloped, and queen e2 is a threat. The knight is hit. This is also a threat. And after f5, I mean, it just basically means that the king is going to be stuck in the center for a very long time. You just have to make sure that black cannot kill your last square bishop with knight a5 and knight x on b3. That's why here a4, knight a5, and bishop a2. We keep the bishop alive, and if black tries to trade it, knight c4, knight e3, we're down a pawn, but the initiative is very strong, and according to an engine, white is just better. And this leads finally to the main continuation, which is knight a5. And here Danya would typically have two continuations. After knight a5, he would play either the short castle or queen e2. Let's maybe start with a short castle. This was his favorite move, but according to an engine, it's objectively worse. And if black will play something like knight x on b3, 8x on b3, and for example play c6, the knight goes here, the pawn is still under attack, and let's say black defends it, you play c4, and it's very easy, again, for black to miss a couple of things because his king is stuck in the center. He's thinking, I want to complete development, I want to play bishop e7. Here comes queen c2, hitting the knight, and suddenly you can't properly respond against c takes on b5. As you can see, the queen on c7 is pinned and the rook on a8 is pinned, and white just has a large advantage. So that's why after c4, black would have to play knight f6, queen c2 with the same threat, captures, captures, and it just leads to some kind of position where we are down a pawn, but according to an engine, we have a full compensation. Here, bishop c3, knight f5, queen f5, and Stockfish even favors white slightly here. Yeah, because of our piece activity. Obviously, there's more lines than this. I just want to show you a couple of them. And there's more lines in the PGN. For example, instead of c6, black will play bishop b7, c4, very common maneuver in these positions. And again, we take the pawn, play rook e1, and for black to stay in the game, his only move is f5. Because if he plays knight f6, again, we have tactical tricks, knight c6, knight e7, and black is just losing material. But instead of this, I like queen e2 kind of a bit more. And here black can immediately make a mistake, meaning if he retreats with a knight, we take it. He doesn't have the time to take on b3. There's going to be discovered check. And obviously, knight e5, bishop d5. The rook is under attack. This is a big threat. Black is just immediately lost. He cannot do this. That's why I think he has to kill the bishop on b3 immediately. Takes and plays c6. Now we retreat with a knight. Target the pawn. This is also a threat. And for black, again, it's quite difficult to play. Let's say he plays f5, protects the knight. We play a short castle. This is a threat. c4 is a threat. The king's exposed. Maybe also knight e3 could be a threat to win the pawn on e5 outright. The position is just very unclear. That's why after queen e2, maybe the best for black is to play f5. We play short castle. And again, here there's a chance for some complications. Let's say bishop b7, we play c4. And it's so easy for black to make the mistake, b takes on c4. Because suddenly after bishop a4 check, he doesn't have a proper response. Meaning c6 is not really a pin, because after d takes on e5, you have a crushing attack. And instead of this, black would have to play c6. We retreat with the knight. Also, in similar positions, sometimes you retreat with knight on e3, sometimes you retreat with knight on b4. I think both of them are pretty good. And let's say there's this position where black decides not to take on b3 and he plays bishop b7. Now you have suddenly bishop e6. Hitting the pawn here and d5. Again with some crazy stuff. Meaning, this is really going to blow your mind, because check this out. Black plays c5, the most natural move in the world. And it's basically a losing move. Can you imagine this? White just plays a4. Yeah, casually a4. The point is, if you take it, take on b5, the knight is pinned, a takes on b5, queen b5, black's queen set falls apart. Black on a castle short. And after a4, b takes on a4, we retreat with the knight. Now play knight c3, and this knight is stuck. And after bishop d8, bishop g5, trade off the bishop, take on a4, take on a5, black is losing a piece. It's crazy. And instead of this, black would have to play knight c5, take on c6, knight e5, and the position has to repeat. None of the sides can continue, because if instead of this, black decides to play queen d8 to keep the game going, after knight g5, white just suddenly develops a crushing attack. And ultimately, I think the safest move for black is to take on b3, and play queen c7, hold on to the pawn. But after knight e3, again, for black, it's very dangerous to hold it, because takes, f3 to follow c5 is going to be knight b5. There's so many tactical tricks in the position that black already should give it up. And he has to play bishop e7. We take the pawn, we take it, push back the knight, and we have this position. And this is Danya's game against Alexei Serrano, played in 2025. Bishop f4, c4, taking away the d5 square. And it's something like this, where engine slightly favors white. Okay, maybe it's about equal, but ultimately, the bottom line is the entire sequence is totally playable. And that's why when I'm speaking from the professional's perspective, I think that the gambits, they do not have to be bad, because I know that there's so many influencers who are advising to play really shady gambits. If the opponent knows what to do, you're just dead lost immediately. I do not think it's a good approach. I think it makes sense to play a gambit where there's a bit risk, not a lot of risk, but there's a lot of reward. And I think the knight e5 line is exactly like such a line, because ultimately, if black does everything perfectly, as I'm about to show you in the coming parts, you get an equal position, but you're not lost. Yeah, you're not in big trouble. And if black makes some of these non-obvious mistakes, you just immediately win the game. Yeah, so I think it's a no-brainer. It's really a great line in practical games. All right, let's move on to the next part. In the second part, we're going to talk about what happens if black decides to take the knight on d5, which probably is a pretty simple response. But some players might not want to do this, because as you can see, after e takes on d5, black immediately has some problems with the pawn on e5. And the most principled choice for black here is to play knight e4. Meaning you cannot quite take the pawn on e5, because after queen e7, you have major problems with the knight. The 4 d6, you just lose a piece. But instead of knight e4 first, let's have a look at some other choices, because it might not be very obvious for black that e4 is not really a great move, because this maneuver very often is common in similar openings. But in particular here, after d takes on c6, e takes on f3, the most accurate move is not what you think. It's not taking the pawn on d7. because after bishop d7, queen f3, bishop c6, the position is just unclear, and black enjoys a very good compensation for the sacrificed pawn. That's why here after e takes on f3, we can play queen takes on f3. And black doesn't really have a fully satisfactory position, because if he decides to play b takes on c6, we suddenly play b3, and this bishop b2 is quite an unpleasant move. For example, bishop c5, bishop b2, queen e7 check is an accurate move for black, and we just put the king on the other side of the board. Let's say bishop a3, rook e1, a5, black is trying to attack us to the queen side, bishop d3, and we just go for a slightly better endgame. And if black goes for some tricks, queen d4, meaning bishop a3 is going to be a funny mate on the board, c3, rook e5, suddenly we start to threaten with some bishop h7, rook h5, queen h4 stuff, and go for the checkmate. Go figure if that's real or not. White just ends up having a much better position anyway. Even if there's no direct attack, the position is just pretty fantastic. Instead of this, if black would play d takes on c6, I think Vidit played a couple of games like this against Danya in 2025. After bishop c4, black has some problems to protect the pawn on f7. Queen e7 check, and very accurate king d1. The point is, we relieve the e1 square for the rook. Bishop e6, rook e1, or take on e6, it doesn't really matter. Take on e6, d3, and when black tried to rearrange the pieces after queen d7 to play bishop d6, suddenly there's queen e3. Double attack to the pawn on a7 and pawn on e6, king b8, queen e6, and I don't think that black has a full compensation for the missing pawn, and this is literally the best he can do. And it visually kind of feels that black should have a way to draw this, but according to Stockfish, black's compensation is not enough. I mean, he's just down a full pawn. Let's go back. And maybe instead of all of this, black could try to give you a check, intermezzo check on e7, and here the response is the same. You play king d1. And now the queen on e7 is misplaced, and after d takes on c6, bishop c4, we just transpose. e4 quite doesn't solve black's problems. Black could try to play knight b4. Now here the trick is you cannot take the pawn on e5 again, because knight e5, queen e7, queen e2, that's a problem. You're just losing the game. But there's d4. And after d4, I think that black has to play e4, knight e5, and again we have some tactical opportunities. For example, if black decides to take on d5. Now in the fried liver attack, this motif is very common. Take on f7. The point is king takes on f7 is queen h5 check. As you can see, the king is attacked, so is the knight. There's the check. Take on d5, and black just can safely resign. And that's why after knight takes on f7, maybe black can give this check. And it's quite funny, because after bishop d2, bishop takes on d2, you have to take again with the king. So the queen h5 is a thing. Check, here, rook e1 or queen e4, doesn't really matter. White keeps a large advantage against the extra pawn, and black is suffering. Knight takes on d5 is a mistake. And instead, black could try to play c6. And I think Danya in one game just blitzed out d6, some funny stuff. But I don't think this is really necessary, because the simple move is d takes on c6, knight c6, and queen h5. Suddenly for black, it's not so easy to make the next move, because g6, watch out for knight c6 and queen e5. That's why black has to play queen e7, bishop c4, there's suddenly some problems, g6, and you can just sacrifice a pawn by playing queen e2. And if black decides to take a pawn like this, suddenly black has big problems with the king's safety. Bishop c3 is a very big threat, meaning queen b2, queen e4, the king is completely wide open. The extra pawn for black, it doesn't really matter. And instead of black plays bishop c5, there's a very nice line, long castle d5 and f4. And bishop c3 is coming with a major force, meaning queen d6, take on d5, bishop c3, that's an attack, and black is just losing material. That's why it's obviously not a good line for black. And if black instead tries to play knight x on d4, queen e4, yeah, it just leads to this position where black is, again, having a worse pawn structure. Maybe I should have shown you knight c6. It doesn't work because of bishop f7. I think so, at least, yeah. Last time I checked, and black has major problems in this position. Instead of this, maybe black can try to play queen e7, which according to an engine is the best move, meaning black deals with any knight f7, he's threatened to take on d5, etc. And here's quite a shocking move, d6. The point is, queen takes on d6 is a very risky choice for black. After bishop c4, he cannot defend the pawn, and I have no idea what is this. After queen d4, takes, this is what engine says, some silly line. All I'm seeing is that we have the material advantage, but maybe the knight on h8 is somehow stuck, but according to Stockfish, white is better in this position. I don't think that humans play like this. And I think the human move is c takes on d6, and now you just play for some compensation, meaning knight c4, knight e3, and black has some problems. The queen is weird. There are problems for black to get the bishop on c8 in the game, and you want to play knight e3, push back the knight on d4, and anchor the knight on d5. Let's say black goes here, a4, typical Stockfish move, just go for short development like nothing cap, and then open up the center with f3. And yeah, like this position looks far from ideal for black, and e3 is very tempting, but this pawn is going to drop after rook a3, and inevitably you're going to win back the pawn. That's why, yeah, that's why this knight b4 is probably not super dangerous, and knight e7 is just knight e5, knight e5, and bishop c4. Here you see the difference is that black cannot play queen e7, which was not the case with knight b4. Yeah, so here you can take it, and after bishop c4, black has problems with the pawn on f7 and the bishop on d5. I think after queen e7, it's something like a short castle. I didn't really check it, yeah. So you don't have to take on d5. If he takes on e5, rook e1, obviously, and he drops the queen. And that's why the main contention is knight e4. And after knight e4, we don't really have a choice. We take it, and again, there's a lot of tricks here. For example, you play queen e2 check. Black cannot automatically respond with bishop e7 because he will get the worst position. Very nice positional pawn sacrifice, d6, which is a recurring theme in Naroditsky's 4 Knights. Queen e4, here, first play bishop d3, threaten with a checkmate, and do not rush by taking the pawn on d4. Just complete development, short castle, you're about to take the pawn whenever you want later. And after bishop f6, just play bishop c4, d3, queen d5, bishop f4, bishop h6. What is black's position here? Yeah, so black is simply having a worse position. And that's why after queen e2 check, black has to play queen e7. Now d6, it doesn't work because black's going to take on e2 and take on d6 with the bishop. But you can go after the pawn on d4. And objectively, the position is probably about level, but I feel that white can still pose black some questions. And I looked at several contestations. For example, if black plays c5, defends the pawn, we play c3. And for example, here, d takes on c3, the obvious move is a mistake. Takes, and this position, according to Stockfish, is so much better for white. We have space, and there's a target on d6, go for some h5, h6. White is doing fantastic, even though there's not a lot of material on the board. D takes on c6 is a mistake. Let's say black plays g6. Takes, and he would have to know that taking the pawn on d4 early is a mistake because this is going to allow white to play something like rook c1 and rook c7. I mean, engine obviously is holding this, like d6, king f2, and at some point if black takes on d4, we play rook c1, rook c7 with a big advantage, but if black does everything correctly, maybe he equalizes. Then I also looked at, instead of c5, I looked at b6, trying to copy white's moves. Bishop b2, and again, it's very easy for black to misplay this, and here Danya had one game like this, where black automatically played bishop b7. The point is, after queen e7, if black takes with the bishop, the pawn on g7 is killed. Meaning bishop d5, bishop g7, rook g8, you walk away with the bishop, and there's no bishop g2. After rook g1, black is just dropping material. Or maybe actually there's a simple trade and play bishop g3, trapping the bishop. Yeah, maybe that actually is a more accurate. And f3, white just secures a large advantage, even though Daniel lost his blitzkrieg, but yeah, he has close to strategically winning position after the opening phase. And that's why if black commits to bishop b7 and a queen e7, he basically has to take with the king, which looks a bit awkward, but there might be a concrete idea to play king d6 and the bishop in f8 protects the pawn on g7. We play bishop c4. The threat is to win the pawn. Black goes forward. Yeah, king of the hill essentially. Check. Now what? Here, f4. Okay, taking the 4 is a bit too much. Short castle. The king is in a harm's way. King f6 here. Like, it's a dance of the king. And it leads to something like this, where we can basically do the same thing that black just did. And if black is super, super accurate, he ends up equalizing the game. Yeah. But it takes quite a bit of accuracy to get there. And that's why the most accurate move for black is not to play bishop b7 automatically, but to take on e2 first. So that after bishop e2, bishop b7, the bishop in f8 defends the pawn on g7. And here I analyze both bishop c4 and bishop f3. I think bishop f3 is a bit easier and also makes a bit more sense. Black plays bishop c5 and we just play b4. Take on d4 and play for some space. And you know, this was quite a fascinating endgame, because when I was analyzing this, my eyes were popping really. I mean, what is this? Because c6, all of this is very human. c3, bishop d6, takes. Here, the engine says that instead of taking on c6 and casting short, or king d1, whatever, the best move is king d1. When I saw this, I was like, what? It can't be real. The point is we are allowing black to double our pawns at the king side. Takes on f3, but apparently there's some pressure at the queen side. Bishop c5, very important, bishop e3, d5, takes, king e2. White's about to play king d3, rook b1, rook b5, rook a7. We have worse pawn structure, but our king is so much more active. And according to an engine, white is just doing better in this position. It's pretty fascinating line. And but also I was looking at bishop c4 with a different idea to play a3, a5 and king e2 and to play king d3. But I think that if black is careful, he equalizes the game with b5. Same idea that we did, only this time from the black's perspective. And then there comes king d3. There's some crazy stuff. And it just pretty much forcing leads to this endgame. We're down a pawn, but because of piece activity, the pawn on a5 could be a target. It's a full compensation for the pawn. Yeah, so I thought it was very, very interesting endgame. But that's why I'm saying, I mean, there's definitely a lot of life in this position, even though it looks quite peaceful. And instead of b6, I also looked at g6, which also looks very human. But you already know the maneuver. After bishop b2, bishop g7, again, there comes d6. Queen e2, bishop e2. If black plays c takes on d6, bishop c4, bishop d5, black has problems with the pawn on d4. Think about long castle, rook e4, get the pawn on d4. You're going to gain it back anyway. And if black tries to take on d6 with the bishop, we play c3, c takes. And again, this is the position where black has to figure out that taking on d4 is not good immediately. Yeah, good luck figuring this out. King d1, bishop f3, rook e1. And this is the absolute best that black can do in this position. We play for a space advantage, and at some point, I guess black has to take the pawn on d4, right? Otherwise, we're going to play maybe b4 already in some lines. So it goes to this, and we still keep pressing. Even though it's complete symmetricality on the board, the black bishop on c8 is quite out of the game. So g6 also doesn't fully solve all the opening problems. And ultimately, the best maybe that black can do is to take on e2, I play bishop c5, which probably is also the most human move. we play bishop e2, d6, and after c3, we do not take with the pawn, but we take with the bishop. And this is what Danya played several times. He will play h4, h5, a4, a5, try to gain space because it was very clear that he was working with engines. For example, here h4, rook e8, king f1, there's no need for us to castle. Bishop f5, I'm making all the human moves for black. h5 gains space, bishop e4, c6, bishop c6, b4. And if black figures out that the best move is d5, he gets an equal position. If not, you're already doing better. You're thinking about moves like rook h4, rook g4, target the pawns, you have some space, maybe push b5 to push away the bishop from the active c6 square. So this position is pretty much full with life. Even though, I mean, after knight e5, knight takes on d5, this is quite a simple choice, and some players from the black's perspective might be tempted to do this to avoid any heavy theory. Knight e4 is also pretty easy to find, but here again he has to know the move queen e7, we play b3, and it's not the draw, and white does enjoy this extra tempo. So I would say white has practically pretty good chances here. All right, let's move on. In the third part, we're going to talk about what happens if black plays bishop c5. Let me select the file. Here we go. Starting moves are obviously the same. Knight c3, knight f6, knight e5. And black plays bishop c5, which I think could be the typical response of any player who is not willing to engage a gambit that he doesn't know, meaning knight x on e4. Also, knight x on d5 feels quite risky because the knight would have to move again from c6. So bishop c5 is a move that black would play anyway in the Italian game. So why not? We are going to play c3. Our idea is to play d4. And here black has many opportunities. All right, so we're going to start with a couple of non-optimal moves. For example, what about d6? Yes, it looks very logical. Black secures the pawn on e5. He threatens to take the knight on d5. We play d4. Takes, takes. You know what's really funny is that so many opponents haven't fallen for this, meaning knight takes on d5, it doesn't work because it feels a logical intermezzo move. After e takes on d5, two black's pieces are under attack. And after bishop b4 check, black is thinking, I mean, you gotta cover from the check with either bishop d2 or knight e2, and then he can retreat with the knight. Of course, first take on d2 and just be good. Here, king e2 happens, and black is just dropping a piece with queen f4 check. And in one game, Shokas, this is what happened. D takes, B takes, queen c2 is probably the most human move. Preparing an escape route for the king on d1. Here, queen f6, black is going for some tricks, basically. But a piece is a piece, as they say. So I don't think we have to look at this really deeply. It's a pretty common mistake. And the problem for black is that if this doesn't work, then he has to accept simply a worse position with bishop b6 and bishop g5. Because now this pin is really monstrous. Maybe there's a check, knight e2, and literally this is the best he can do. Play h6, take on f6, very aggressive move b4. Again, knight b4 is going to be a capture and queen f4 check. Black is losing a piece. Knight c4, bishop d4, very, very dynamic play. And black ends up in a terrible position. We have massive space advantage. The black king has no safe place to go. And according to an engine, white's advantage is significant. d6 is a mistake, but so many people are doing this. Here, knight takes on d5 is also a move, but it's not the most accurate move because we can take it. And if black responds with knight e7, he has some problems. We take on e5 and we play d4, and you see the knight on d5 and the bishop on c5, they're kind of disconnected. Bishop b6, there's a double attack. There's a scholar's mate threatening, the knight on d5 is hit, and at least you're ruining his pawn structure. Something like h6, take on f6 a couple of times, and just play a fantastic endgame. That's why after e takes on d5, sometimes black tries to play e4, takes, and here it's a quite important accuracy. You start with d4, so that you can meet queen e7 check with bishop e3. And after bishop d6, there's nothing wrong by accepting the pawn on d7. And there was a very similar line in Naroditsky's 4 Knights where we would not take the pawn. But here it's just good, because after bishop d7, queen f3, black doesn't have a full compensation for the missing pawn. For example, shoot castle, bishop e3, bishop c6, it's not a big deal. You can always play d5, push back the bishop. Queen h4 maybe, here f5, g3, and yeah, it's just an extra pawn for white with no compensation for black. And that's why knight x on d5 is not an optimal move. He can try to play knight x on e4, and now it kind of gets similar to the Belgrade gambit, to the main lines of the first part. We play d4. Black, I think he has to accept it, because if he plays bishop b6, now he has big problems. Bishop d3, the knight has to retreat, we take the bishop and take on e5, and already here you feel, oh, something is really wrong with black's position. Queen e7 again is going to be some sort of a short castle, black gonna take on e5, and after knight g4, we do not worry about the pawn on e5, just castle short, because there's always rook e1, short castle, knight g5, white is winning. Yeah, bishop h7, queen h5, that's it. The game's done. Instead of bishop b6, black probably has to accept it, and we play it in the same fashion. We play bishop d3. And there were a couple of games, I think even against Danya, where the opponents try to play shoot castle, go for some counterattack, meaning you cannot take on e4 because there's going to be rook e8. Well, you can take on e4, meaning takes, here, knight g5, defends the bishop on e4. If black plays f5, there comes queen h5. Threatened with a mate, queen h7, queen h8. And after h6, there's a very cute end of the game, meaning check. A g takes on f6 is going to be check and mate. Queen f6, the rook is ganging, check, here. This is like one of the blitz games that Danya played against almost 2600 Elo player. And yeah, he won the game without the fight. So short castle is a mistake. Black has to probably do something with the knight, meaning f5 again feels very risky, because we can play short castle. Accepting the second pawn, it just feels incredibly bad. Take on e4, play bishop g5, now you see the queen is in trouble. Knight e7, rook e1, there's a million pins, there's no way black is going to walk away from this alive. And bishop e7, I love this move, knight e5. Yeah, beautiful move. Knight x on e5 would checkmate the queen with bishop e7, takes, check, knight g6 with a killing attack. The rook is ganging, check, f4, another spectacular move. But already here, I think white had more than one way to win this. B takes, queen g6, with approximate material balance on the board, but f5, f6 is just maybe rook e1, rook e4 is just deciding the fate of the game in favor for white. That's why f5 is borderline losing. And instead of this, yeah, so basically black has to play knight f6. And again, there's this check, queen e2, which is quite difficult to meet, because if black decides to block it with the bishop, we obviously take on f6 and play short castle. And again, the black king is in trouble. Short castle is going to be queen e4. That's immediately a mate. And after d5, yeah, this was one of the most beautiful lines, actually, of the bootcamp. After knight e4, c takes on d4, black feels quite safe. But according to an engine, he is in trouble. Bishop e4, queen d7, rook c1. I think in the blitz game, Danya played something else. c6, queen f3. And how do you play with black? Probably a long castle, right? Yeah, except there's rook c6. The point is, b takes on c6 is just gonna force black to give up the queen on b7. And queen c6, rook c1, even though black gets 2 rooks for the queen, his king is too exposed. Here, bishop a6, bishop b7, queen c3, black is lost. And the best he can do is to play rook b8, give up the exchange, and play a lost position. He can't do this. And that's why after queen e2 check, he has to play king f8. And now there's this position, which is, from a practical standpoint, very risky. Because you could take on f6, play show castle. And for example, if here black decides to accept the pawn on c3, rook e1 is very accurate, threatening with a checkmate. Black defends here. And the simplest plan you can do is to double the rooks at the e-file. Like, let's say, black takes care of the g5 square, h3, stopping some bishop g4 stuff, rook e2, rook e1. From a practical standpoint, this position is incredibly difficult for black to play. Engine says it's about equal. So I think it actually means that black is in trouble. Because, yeah, his moves are coming in very, very difficultly. And instead of this, if black plays d6, bishop g5, again, obviously we'd reject the queen trade. Takes, rook e1. Queen d5 is very risky because there's a chance that black is going to simply drop the queen. Knight e5 is some engine move, but it looks pretty scary. Here, this is how engine plays. And yeah, apparently black is okay to give up the queen. And the position is just very unclear. Good luck for black to figure this out. And maybe the more human move is queen d7. And we pretty much play the same. Like b takes, h6. Here it's okay to trade the bishops, because we double the rooks at the e-file. And again, from a practical point of view, black's position is very difficult because he doesn't know exactly how to secure the king's safety. Let's go back to the very beginning. And yeah, this knight e4, I think in this version, it's looking worse than in the first part, because we are gaining some tempos with d4. And maybe he can try to play h6 to stop all of this. And here I think Danya would play, if I'm not terribly mistaken, I forgot to write it down, I think he would play d4. Takes, takes, knight takes on d5. And unfortunately, you cannot take with a pawn here anymore. This is not the same line, because after bishop b4 check, there's no king e2. Yeah, there's knight e7, and the black pawn stands on d7, not on d6. You're not winning a piece. You can't do this. So don't mix it up. But here you can take on c5, and the position, like visually, it looks really nice. We have the center and we have the bishops, but chess is a very concrete game. And I think you're just dropping the pawn on e4 pretty much by force. Yeah, there's bishop g4 incoming. Black is very active here. And literally, this is the best you can do. Play a position down a pawn, but probably with sufficient compensation for the missing pawn, because the pawn on c7 is a bit loose, and two bishops are two bishops after all. But I do not think that d4 is the best that you can do in this position. And you could try to play d3. And if black plays should castle, it's going to transpose to one of the most fascinating lines of this part, which I'm about to show you. But I also like bishop c4 a lot, because now it feels that, again, this is quite dangerous. h6, bishop c4, it feels like it favors white, including this tempo. d4 takes, show castle, c takes on d4. Engine says it's unclear, but again, I think it's a fantastic gambit. You get a lot of extra tempi for your initiative. Probably the human is going to play something like a should castle. We play d3, d6. And now you play some great Italian game, which maybe is a bit boring for the premise of the Naroditsky's 4 knights, but there's still some pressure. Okay, I'm not going to analyze it too deeply. There's definitely ways how black can sidestep. And let's now focus on the main line. Black plays should castle and d3. Well, for occasional fun, it is possible to play d4, and which is exactly what Danya would do. Because after e takes on d4, c takes on d4, here, it's not very obvious for black what's the best move. Because if he would play knight takes on d5, we take on c5, knight f6, we play bishop d3, and here, actually, this rook e8 is not the best move. because we can play should castle, and if black decides to accept the pawn on e4, I think it's worth a shot, at least for some occasional games. We take it, we play knight g5, and we develop a terrific initiative, just like that. Yeah, so there's an attack, knight e4, dominate all the dark squares, black is in big trouble. Yes, it's fantastic, but unfortunately, black doesn't have to fall for this. And instead of this, instead of rook e8, he has to play d5. Queen d6, and again, we have to go for the same position where probably we have to give up the pawn somehow and claim that we have a compensation because of the piece activity on the bishop pair. Well, black is slightly better, but not a lot. Probably you're safe. But there's a problem. There's a bigger problem. After d4, e takes, and c takes on d4, if black has ever worked with engines, he's going to know that there's a very strong move knight e4. Knight e4, knight e5. You have to take it. There's queen h4. That's an attack. There's rook e8, threatening rook e3. And literally, this is the best you can do. Play bishop e2 and play should castle. And black has more than one way to get an advantage. But yeah, it's not great. You're down a pawn, black has bishops, maybe because the bishop on c8 is kind of stuck. You can try to hope for something, but objectively, engine says black is much better. So d4, I think it's for some inspired moments when you feel very artistic, but there's no need for that. You can just play d3. d3 is good. And again, here, black has several combinations. So our threat is to play bishop g5. And black, it seems he has to react against us in some way. Let's say he plays knight e5, which is probably the simplest choice that black could do if he wants to equalize the game. Takes knight e7, we take on e5, we play d4, and now you just have a nice Petrov-like position. I don't know what is better. Is it bishop c4 and play this position? Engine says what is tiny bit better, but probably just equal. Or is it bishop d3? And maybe this knight on d5 for black is a bit awkward. But, I mean, objectively, it's just equal. So, this is just good. But black could also do something else. For example, black could play rook e8. And now after bishop g5, bishop e7, here Danya was playing only knight e7. Knight e7, queen e7, he will play this position. It's a nice Italian game, but I think black is totally fine. I decided to improve his suggestion. And instead of this, I like bishop takes on f6 way more, which I think would be more in the spirit of the Naroditsky variation. After bishop takes on f6, we suddenly can develop a very interesting initiative at the king side. For example, check this out. Let's say black plays knight b8. He wants to play c6 and smoke out the knight on d5. Looks very human. We have actually two choices. So the choice number one is h5, take on f6 and play h6 with a very interesting position. The pawn on h6 is quite annoying for black. Or the more fun line is knight g5, and this is where it gets really crazy. c6 and queen h5. Yeah, this is a double attack. Here, black's best move here is to take it. Takes, queen h5, that's a double threat here and here. Black takes, h6. And here, it just makes no sense at all for a human being to figure this out. The best move in this position, according to Stockfish, is d4. Come on. What's the idea? I mean, the point apparently is white wants to castle the long side, and black's going to play d4, close the center. And if you take on h6, black's going to play g5. But we play d4 to sacrifice a pawn, to open up the position so that the bishop goes to d3 in some lines to help you to attack. It's totally nuts. E takes, now we play long castle. D takes, G takes, G5, bishop C4. Yeah, black already is walking a tightrope here to survive this. I'm just going to show you the stop engine line. Rook F5, Queen G6, that's a double attack. Queen F6 is Queen G8 mate. Bishop G8, totally crazy. And it ends with a perpetual check. If you want, you can replay this at the slower motion. It's just, yeah, like fascinating line here. And that's why I think that this bishop takes on F6 is more fun. But objectively, of course, black is holding on. Black could also play h6, the main move, because I don't think he has really anything else. So knight e5 is the simple move, and d6, it just runs into bishop g5. Yeah, it just feels very bad. It's like something you are never supposed to do in the Italian game. Like here, take on f6, and you're just dominating all the light squares. Think about some queen h5, knight f5, etc. Or maybe queen f3 even. Long castle obviously is in the cards. And if black does something like this, he's totally unaware what's going on. He's just going to get checkmated. Yeah, bishop d3, queen f5, or queen h5, knight f5. There's no way that this is survivable for black. Which leads to the main line. And the main line is h6. And black is thinking, okay, I'm stopping bishop g5. Where's the problem? Well, this is where the real fun actually starts. We take on f6, queen f6, g4. Yeah. g4, this is basically the game I showed you in the introduction that Danya played against Jan Nepomniachtchi, and it tries to play g5. And Stockfish fully supports the position from the white's perspective. And it's not so easy for black to find the right moves. Actually, I don't know what is the right move, because unless you have deeply analyzed this, then good luck figuring it out. For example, let me show you a couple of lines. Let's say black plays d6, like normal developing move, which already is not a good move. We play g5, bishop g5, I suppose queen g6, rook g1. There was one game where black attempted against Danya to play queen h5. Like, the pin is there, you want to walk away from this. Kind of makes sense. Bishop f6. And bishop g4 doesn't work because of h3. The point is bishop takes on f3, rook g7 here, rook g5. Oh wait, what was the move here? I think it was, yeah, rook g5, you just collect the queen. That's a check. And black just resigned. He could have, of course, still continued with queen g6. And after takes, g5, black is still in big trouble because queen f4, the juicy move, the juicy square, is just met with rook h1 and the queen is trapped. How about that? Yeah, so it's quite fascinating. d6 is not good. Maybe knight e7 is a good move. Like, you want to play knight g6 and secure the king and control the dark squares. g5, bishop g5, and queen b6 is a very human move from black, like threaten here and here. But white can play d4. Maybe there's other moves as well. I didn't really analyze this so deeply. And b4. Black plays bishop d6, and there's definitely room for some excitement. Meaning, of course, queen d4 is a move. There's nothing wrong with the move. But I kind of like playing a gambit in the spirit of Danya. Bishop c4. Let's say black plays the obvious move here. Play h3, a5, bishop e3. The queen is kind of stuck here. Knight g5. Suddenly there's some attack at the king side going on with queen h5. Now comes b takes on c5. And according to Stockfish, it's about equal. Yeah. So, I don't know. It just feels like it's really fun way to play the line like this. After knight e7, black could also play queen d8, which is another human move. And after g5, h5, here, Danya, I checked his games, he would typically play knight h4, which I don't think it's very accurate. I think you have to be a bit more accurate to move order. Let's start with bishop g2. And again, for black, it's not so clear. How is he supposed to continue? Because if he plays d5, we take it, we play short castle. Now what? There's some kind of discovered attack threatened by the knight. Bishop g4 is going to be h3. Then what? Queen d8, rook e1. And if you defend the pawn with rook e8, and it seems that black is doing everything correctly, boom, there comes g6. Takes knight g5. Wow, what a gambit, right? Queen b3 stuff and smothered mate ideas and everything. So maybe the best that black can do in this position is to play d6, short castle. And here the idea is you want to play king h1, knight h4, and play f4. And this is what Naroditsky was doing several times in his games, although with a different move order. For example, bishop b6 here, h3 here, or knight h4. I didn't check this so thoroughly. A 4, and the white has a better position. And that's why black, he would have to know that the best move in this position is knight e7, which, okay, you can figure it out, but now comes d4. takes, knight e4, f4 is coming. And there's a very accurate sequence of the moves that black has to know. White's attack is looking very scary. But according to Stockfish, after d5, the position is just level. I don't know. It feels like it's a tactical mess on the board. It feels like f5, f6 might be in the cards. So White's position feels a lot fun to play. And finally, let's go to the main continuation. If black plays d5, which looks very logical, meaning if you take on d5, there's going to be bishop g4. Of course, we play g5. Black has no choice. Bishop g5. And let's say black plays queen g6, which looks very logical. Meaning, if you take the pawn, there's going to be e4. And suddenly black takes over the game. Right? But the queen on g6 is unfortunately placed because we can play rook g1. D takes, knight h4. How do you play here? Queen h5 is all kinds of threats are incoming against the black king. I suppose queen h7, bishop f6, g6, and this is one Danya's game where he did not find the best move, which is queen b3. Suddenly rook g6 is coming in and the king on g8 is pinned. Bishop e6, queen b7, and black's position is just falling apart. Yeah, the best he can do is like some e3, bishop e3. I don't know who plays like this. Yeah, like rook g3 here. And Engine says that black is only much worse and not losing immediately. But anyway, I don't think it really changes the evaluation that black is in trouble in this line. And instead of this, black could play queen d6, the human move. Rook g1. And here I checked all kinds of continuations from black. For example, if black plays knight e7, I think this was a game between Danya and Maksudlu, where is d4, takes, e5. And here, quite comically, both players missed that queen b6 is impossible because of b4. You're just winning a piece. But okay, it was a blitz game and black is in trouble anyway. So knight e7 is not working. f6 kind of secures the king, but it also allows white to initiate the attack. This knight e2, queen h5. This is the idea, this is an idea, this is an idea. Long castle, obviously. Very easy to play for white. Maybe rook e8. Looks very human, but again, knight e2 is the same threat. Takes on d5 and knight e4. d4, this is one of Naroditsky's games. Queen f3, threatening some bishop f6 stuff. h4, h5, the position just basically flows itself. Knight c4, rook g3. I think he could have done something a bit better along the way, but yeah, Danya just proceeded with a fantastic attack, open up the position, and black ended up dropping material. Yeah, such a wonderful coordination of the pieces. This is one of Danya's games. 3-minute segment, by the way, yeah? So, instead of rook e8, maybe black could try to play d takes on e4, but as I already said in the introduction against Nepo, that's a mistake because of knight e2. Knight e4, knight f6 is incoming. Here, and now this forces black to trade important lines with bishop. Takes, and black is much worse because f6 is not working. Here, bishop c4, goodbye. Again, doesn't work. And ultimately, the question is, what is then black supposed to do? Maybe close the position with d4. But now there's some knight h4 stuff. Knight h4, queen h5, knight f5. And Engine somehow holds this, but it's not super excited about it. And maybe black can try to go for some f5 counterattack. I think this was one of Naroditsky's games. And according to an Engine, here the best move is b4 and c4. Close the queen side for good. Forget about the pawn on b4. The threat is to play c5. Here, queen h5, f takes, and bishop g2. So the threat is bishop d5 with a totally killing position. I think after bishop e6, there's something like rook g7, king g7, check here, check here. Everything just starts to fall apart for black. Rook f7, queen g6 with her. I think there was a mate somewhere like this. There should be a brutal checkmate on the board. I didn't really check this. So the bottom line is, this is one of the most fun lines that you can play. And bishop c5 is one of the most played continuations. After c3, black can play should castle, d3, and h6. So many people play this. Of course, black can play knight takes on d5 and have this equal position, but again, in no lines, white is in trouble, at least in this chapter. So yeah, that already alone makes it as a fantastic line. All right, let's wrap up this part here, and let's check what else black can do. All right, let's check what else do we have in this position. We have looked at knight x on d5, knight x on e4, bishop c5, but what about if black completes development with bishop e7? A very solid choice. The main recommendation here is going to be bishop d3, which was Daniel's most favorite choice. But for some occasional fun games, you can also try to play d4. And if black accepts the pawn on d4, for example, he plays c takes on d4, it feels like it's some sort of a Scotch gambit. We play bishop c4, also bishop d3, by the way, looks really fun. Castles, d6, takes. Yeah, but probably the position is going to liquidate into something like this, queen d3, and the chances are quite level. But I mean, maybe your opponent doesn't know all of this, and he could respond with d6. And one of the most favorite choices by Daniel in these positions was to take the darks with bishop on e7, play d5, bishop d3, knight e7, and bishop e3. I think also you can think about ideas like c4, bishop c2, you play a good version of the King's Indian defense. And black at least a couple of times, I think they were Arturs Naroditsky and Maxime Vachier-Lagrave, two heavyweights in the world. They played exactly like this. From the black's perspective, they want to play knight c5. But after bishop g5, f6, bishop d2, black is worse, because the threat is to play h3. And if black plays a5 after knight g5, white's chances are better. And there was a match, by the way, between Daniel and Daniel Bogdandiak, a very strong grandmaster rated about 2700, where black would play knight c5 a couple of times, but after takes, and something like knight e2 followed by a4, white's chances are better. So for some fun games, sure, it's an interesting line, but the main consideration here is a bishop d3. After bishop d3, once again, black has some choices. For example, he can revisit the opportunity to take on d5, because now after knight b4, he is not only hitting the pawn on d5, but also the bishop on d3, bishop c4. And if black decides to play d6, actually, this is not an accurate move, because white will get the better chances after c3 and d4. The black knight on h6 is kind of disconnected from the game. And if here black decides to be aggressive and play e4 and f5, this leads to some very sharp lines after f3. And it's not very clear if black can play e3 or not. For example, if he plays e3 and f4, you're about to play g3, take on f4, take on e3, castle alongside. And this is where Stockfish says, and he plays bishop h4. Queen e2, should castle, sacrifice the bishop, king d1. Yeah, it feels like this is freestyle chess. Essentially, very inspired game, but according to Stockfish, white is doing a bit better. But maybe instead of this, black would play should castle, we take on e4. It looks a bit risky, but concretely here, black doesn't have anything, and we can still go for the long castle. A pawn is a pawn, after all. And the best move here after bishop c4 is to play e4. We play knight e4. And now I looked at a couple of choices for black. For example, if he plays should castle, which I don't think is accurate. There's a3, knight a6, and d3. And we do enjoy, again, some space advantage. E takes on d3, and yeah, these are pure engine lines. It's very difficult to understand them. C3, knight c5, b4, queen d3, just going for some positional domination. Yeah, c4, bishop c2, build up a powerful battery by the queen and the bishop. The other bishop goes to b2 most likely. And apparently white has a large advantage here. And there's a couple of spectacular lines like this, so you can check obviously the PGN for the full lines. For example, knight c5, bishop e3 takes. We don't take the pawn, but we play b4 instead. We avoid black trading the knight for the bishop e3, and we just end up having a fantastic gambit. And most likely black is going to drop the pawn on c7 anyway. But the most accurate move in this position after knight e4 is bishop f6, knight f5, and here black has a choice. He can play either the should castle or d6. After d6, knight g3, castles, black can play c6, which is again very accurate move because rook e8, defending the pawn is not very accurate because after c3, knight e3, we have very important move knight x1 e4. As you can see, rook e4 is bishop d3 and knight x1 c1 is knight x1 f6. We're winning a pawn. And putting the knight on a6 is just disconnecting the knight from the game. That's why the most accurate move for black is to play c6. We take on e4, and we have this position where you can take on d5, but it's not going to be enough to have a real advantage. And I push this a bit where you get to bishops. Engine says it's about equal, but from a practical perspective, it looks like white has some chances for an opening advantage. But I don't think you're going to get many games in the line anyway here, because who plays like this from black's perspective, knight e5 and knight b4? And black could play should castle here, and here it's quite important. I think there was one game by Daniel where he played d6 immediately. He definitely knew the idea, but probably in a blitz game he didn't remember the move order. And here the accurate move order is a3 first, because if black plays knight a6, we play d6, c takes on d6, and I just love the concept. We do not take on d6. We just play for lead in development. Should castle. Queen c7 is a mistake. Bishop d5, d3, the position opens up. Black's position literally makes no sense at all. If black plays knight c7, we play d3 anyway, with a fantastic compensation. The pawn on d5 is dropping. And the best that black can do in this position is to play d5, bishop d5, knight c7, to play d5 in one go. And still in this position, it feels that white is pressing a bit. But the most accurate move, I mean, I don't know who's going to figure this out, that after a3, black has to play b5. Yeah, apparently this is a very accurate move, according to an engine. Takes, queen e2, a5, and it just leads to some total craziness. I'm just going to show you where it leads. Black has some compensation. I do not, to be honest, see what he has for the pawn, but engine says there's a full compensation for black, so I'm not going to really argue with it. But anyway, I mean, in none of the lines, white is in trouble. White is pushing for something. So that's why knight x on d5 is something that you should know, but you shouldn't be really worried about it too much. If black plays here, should castle, then probably we are going to transpose to d6, c3. We are going to play bishop c2, should castle d4. These are the lines I'm about to show you. So let's focus on d6. c3, we are stopping knight x on d5 and knight b4 here. And again, black can take on d5. Because let's say he takes on d5, he plays knight b8, bishop c2. And this is where Daniel played a couple of high-level games. He played the games against Daniil Dubov. He played games against Hans Niemann. For example, if black plays f5, this is one game he played against Hans. f5, d4, and a very important maneuver, knight g5. The trick is obviously bishop g5, check, queen g5. White simply has a better position. Bishop pair, play f3, open up the position. Hans played should castle, and here Daniel played queen h5, and no, I think he played knight e6 actually immediately, which was a mistake. He should have went for queen h5 if I remember correctly, and bishop g5 again. What is just better? But there's some fascinating lines. What happens if black plays h6? We play knight e6, takes. We're about to secure the pawn on e6 with d5. And here there's bishop h6, which maybe is not really that of a big surprise, because there's the check, there's the check, there's the check. It should be a draw, but white can actually fight for a big advantage here. And it starts with g4. I mean, it still makes sense. Queen h6, king g8, rook g1, g takes and f5. That's the idea. Obviously, black closes the position. We play g5. Still rook g1, rook g4 something. Black plays here. He wants to get the queen to the defense. f3 also makes sense. Open up the bishop. And after queen e7, we just trade the queens. Takes on d5, h4, h5, h6. White is winning. Okay, obviously, black can improve the game somewhere along the way, but it just shows that these lines are fire. Instead of f5, black will play should castle, which maybe is the more human move. d4, knight e7, should castle. White wants to play something like rook e1, play for space. And it seems that black has to play this f5 at some point. But after d takes on e5, he doesn't really have a choice. If he takes with the knight, there's going to be knight e4. There's some problems with e6 square. D takes on e5. And here I want to improve Daniel's game, meaning I propose to play queen e2, because this pawn is suddenly not so easy to defend. Bishop d6 runs into knight g5. Bishop f6 drops the pawn on f5. And e4 allows white to play knight e4 and play f3. And this is where engine actually says that the best that black can do in this position is to play b6, which nobody plays like this, to be honest. So let's say there's this line, knight g5, knight e6, c4, some fascinating stuff. h4. Okay, whatever. You can check the PGN if you're super interested, but the game is really chaotic. It's very unclear. So should be plenty of fun. Black could play c6 immediately, forcing you to take on c6 so that he can take with the knight, but actually he's not forcing anything, because after d4, you're just having the better chances. So c6 doesn't work. And the main continuation, I think, is bishop g4. d4 anyway, knight e7, we walk away from the pin. And I think here black has a couple of interesting choices. For example, he can play bishop h5, bishop g6, deal with the annoying pressure. And I would like to say that white has some pressure here, but objectively, yeah, there's not much, to be honest. Maybe white is tiny bit better, but ultimately it's just an equal position. But maybe black accepts the challenge if he plays a 5. And now there's some crazy stuff. We take it, we play h3, and these positions are very difficult to evaluate, because black could play bishop h5, meaning you cannot take on f5 because of bishop g6. The bishop is pinned. This is one of Danya's games against Danil Dubov. g4, very common pawn sacrifice, e4, queen e3. Actually, I'm not sure, is queen e3 the best or queen d1? These lines are so similar. It could be just everything is about the same. And yeah, here he could have got better chances. King h1, queen g2, rook g1, rook e1. Black's initiative looks scary, but also white has some threats. And according to an engine, white's advantage is pretty significant. But I think that the more human move for black is to play e4. And here I was not sure where to place the queen. Queen e3, queen d1, queen b5 even. According to an engine, everything is about the same. I ended up with queen d1. And it just leads again to some craziness. Like this rook h2, queen e7, king f1, super unclear. Engine doesn't know what to make of this. And also bishop f3 is super unclear, where black is attempting to take over the game, and instead we're castling the long side. There's a very nice accurate move, d6, bishop e4, and it just leads by force to some endgame, where white is tiny bit better, but probably again it's just equal. Probably just equal. So all of this happens after bishop g4, after knight e5. But like I already said, black has some other choices. The most logical move is the shoot castle. Maybe black can try to play bishop e6, but I think in the Naroditsky variation, the bishop e6 rarely makes a good move. Because again, white can trade the docks with bishop. And here Daniel will play bishop c2, which is a slight inaccuracy. d5, d3, queen e2, and the position is about level. What I propose is to play shoot castle to be better equipped against black's d5. And if black plays d5, there's suddenly bishop b5, the position opens up. White is just doing better. The idea is to play bishop f1, b4, b5, go for some queenside attack. According to an engine, white's chances are better. And if black instead tries to do something else, he doesn't play d5, you're just going to play rook e1, bishop f1, and push d4. And it's not very clear what black is supposed to do. Let's say, this is literally the same. d4 is happening. Or let's say black castle short side, rook e1, again bishop f1, and d4. White is again better. That's why this rook e1 instead of bishop c2 is more accurate. I'm pretty sure Danya would have figured it out himself, but he never got around to play this line again. And the main move is shoot castle. We play bishop c2. And once again, black has choices. For example, black plays rook e8. Daniel would typically play knight e7, shoot castle, knight g6, and play this position. But I like my move a bit more. Shoot castle. And if black plays something like, this looks quite similar to what we already discussed. Yeah, bishop e3, white has some pressure, seems a bit better, maybe not a lot. But if black instead decides not to take it and play, for example, bishop f8, play d4, the threat is to play bishop g5, takes, and again we have some sort of king's Indian defense position where white's chances are to be preferred. Knight e1, suddenly f4 is a big thing. I think something like knight g6 is going to be g3, and the knight on g6 is really weird. And you can play at the queen side. Queen g6 looks a bit more human. But f4, f5, f takes, and okay, I don't think we have to go into this line very deeply, but white is just doing better. The small nuance here is that you have to stop black from playing queen b6 check in some lines, and that's why d6 is very accurate. You're cutting off the line, meaning c takes, e takes, you can sacrifice an exchange and play g4. You see the knight to the 5 is pinned, and the black is in trouble. So that's why after d6, black has to take with a queen, and you're just doing better because of f6, rook f6. And yeah, black's position is looking quite shaky. These are like sidelines. I don't know who's going to play like this, to be honest, from black. Bishop g4 is a typical mistake in the Italian game. Under Lopez, that's like a common understanding that the bishop stands poorly on h5, even though it feels like it's a great pin. g4, and yeah, you see this bishop on g6 and knight on f6, they're really badly placed. The best that black can do is to open up the center. Somehow, this king h2, king g3, it's a pretty fascinating line, but white keeps pressing with some future ideas of knight f5, queen e2, bishop e3, and go for the kingside attack. The center is closed. All right, so instead of rook e8, black could also play bishop e6. Like I already said, bishop e6 really is a good move in the Naroditsky variation. The idea is, again, we trade off the docks with bishop. We play shoot castle. And here the key idea is to meet d5 with d4. Not d3. Probably d3 is also good. And white ends up having a fantastic position because black is missing out the docks with bishop. For example, black takes it, e5, here, and there's a very important move, knight takes on d4, so that we can bother the black knight on e4 with f3, knight e5, and this is Danya's game against Vladislav Artemyev, another 2700 ELO plus player, fantastic player. And Daniel played f3 in the game, f3 and rook e1. And he went for some king's attack, which looks very human. He won the game anyway. But I like rook e1 a bit more, because after knight g6, knight e6, black doesn't have a satisfactory response, meaning he has to take with a pawn, takes, rook e4, what is just better. Triple the heavy pieces in the d-file, and I think the black is going to drop the pawn on e6 at some point. After d4, maybe he can try to play knight e4. Take on e5, take it, and this feels like it's some sort of Scotch game. The bishop on c2 allows you to push those pawns at the king side very rapidly. Knight c5, b4, f4, f5 is a big threat. Black has to stop it. And here Daniel had a couple of games against Timur Kuibakarov and Brewington Hardaway. I think both games were played in 2025. And after b6, black has major problems with the pawn on d5. In the game, I think Daniel messed up something because, I mean, it's a blitz game after all, but White's game is very straightforward. Just apply immense pressure against the pawn on d5, and most likely it's gonna drop. Let's go back a bit and see what else black can do. Yeah, bishop e6, not great. And again, bishop g4 is not a good choice for these positions, because this bishop will be locked out of the game. For example, bishop g6, and here instead of knight e7, there's a more accurate knight f6. Yeah, these bishops on g6 and f6, they're not doing anything. You're about to start a Kingston attack. This is one of Daniel's games. Takes, bishop e7, h4, h5, knight h4. Everything just flows very naturally. Rook e8, knight f8, bishop f8. And here, Daniel, I think if I remember correctly, he played bishop e3 and rook d1, which is not very accurate. He could have basically won the game on the spot by playing bishop d2, which also looks more human. He's about to castle alongside. Bishop h6 is a threat. And after queen c8, the threat of g5 is immediately winning the game. There's nothing the black can do about it. Black plays knight e7 and g5. It involves some sacrifices, but White's attack is way too strong. Bishop g5, rook g5, knight f5, rook g1, h6, f6, queen e4, queen h7. It's just too much. Black is completely lost. That's why also bishop g4 is not working, and we are finally arriving to the main continuation that most likely at some point black has to take on d5. Otherwise, White's just going to take either an f6 or an e7, push d4, and enjoy an opening advantage. Knight takes on d5, takes on d5, knight b8, d4, everything is more or less the same. Knight e7, should castle, and yeah, it feels that black has to play f5. Maybe he doesn't have to, but then again, queen d3, rook e1, these are very easy moves incoming. So for black, it does make sense to close the diagonal and fight for the center. D takes on e5. I think that black has to, again, take with the pawn. We briefly talked about this position. And Naroditsky typically here will play rook e1, which is not very accurate. But queen e2 is a better move. And here we already checked the line that after bishop d6, there's knight g5, queen f6, and to have some fun, I'm going to throw in the mix also g4, opening up the bishop, threatening the pawn on h7, knight b6, knight e6, and whatever is this. I have no idea. Engine says it's about equal. It's a very, very unclear position. But yeah, knight e6 is just good. Followed by bishop e2. According to Stockfish, White's chances are slightly better. Instead of bishop d6, e4 is a very human move, but now White's about to open up the center with f3, like knight e4, knight f6, f3. Black doesn't have the time to pick up the pawn on d5. Takes. I don't know what he's supposed to do now. The pawn is hit. Bishop c5, bishop e3. Knight e5 is already not good. Queen c4, and suddenly black can lose on the spot, for example. Yeah, like he plays bishop b6, bishop e3, c6, and very easy tactics. That's it. Black is just losing something on d5. That's why the best he can do here in this position is play bishop d4, and according to an engine, black is somehow holding on. He has an extra pawn, but this ducks with bishop. White's activity ensures white the better chances. And that's why the best that black can do really is this bishop d6. I also was looking briefly at this engine's abomination of b6. The idea of the engine is that if you take it, there's some big compensation, which I could agree. Yeah, f3, queen h4, there's some attack. I could agree with this. But if you are responding with engine moves, so I'm going to do the same, king h1. And now the point is that after bishop b7, this no longer is very accurate because we're going to take on e5, and at the end of the line, there's going to be a check on e6. Yeah, go figure. Black plays bishop d6, and it's still more or less the same with g4, and a very exciting game. All right. Yeah, so this bishop e7 is super solid stuff. And our approach is a bit different. We cannot play c3, d4 here. And bishop d3, it looks a bit illogical because we're not dropping, but we're blocking the pawn, the bishop on d3, the bishop on c1. But there's a very concrete idea. We want to play c3, bishop c2, d4. And the best that black can pretty much do in these positions is to take on d5, probably after d6. And most of the time he gets an equal position, but I think there are definitely many lines where white has excellent chances to get an opening advantage. All right, that's the bishop e7. Let's check what else do we have. The next move in the list is d6. Let me select the board. There you go. Starting moves the same. We play knight e5, and black plays d6. Very solid choice, but it comes with some concrete ideas, meaning black wants to be flexible. He wants to take on d5 and remove the knight someplace, maybe knight b4 or knight e7. And this is the moment when we can play d4. Immediately try to take over things in the center. And also I think it's going to be one of the shortest parts of the entire Naroditsky variation. Because here, if black decides to play knight takes on e4, we simply transpose to the first part when we play bishop b5, which is strictly probably the best continuation for black, at least according to an engine. Black in the beginning has tiny bit advantage, but it tends to disappear. The lines are very tactical. And pretty much the only good move other than knight takes on e4 is e takes on d4. It's quite surprising because bishop g4, this move is as much as tempting, it's not the best move. And in this position, Daniel would play queen d3. I don't know why he suddenly liked this move. It invites some kind of a gambit, takes, g takes on f3, and it just leads to some fascinating lines like, let's say, knight e4, c3 here, queen b5, rook g1, or bishop e3, and yeah, whatever is this. Check out this line. Bishop a6, queen b5, queen b7. Very, very sharp, and it's just very difficult to evaluate. According to an engine, it's about equal. And also there's the other continuation. Instead of knight takes on d4, maybe e takes on d4 makes a bit more sense to give the flexibility for the black knight. And also this position is quite hard to evaluate from afar. White is down a pawn, white is attacking, but there's not so many pieces on the board, and Engine is again pretty clueless how to evaluate this, but I kind of like white's position. There's a long castle, some h4, h5 ideas at the king side. I would love to play this. However, I'm not entirely sure if queen d3 is the best move, because yeah, Stockfish doesn't fully support it and says that there's some better choices. I also looked at c3 move, which leads to some complicated lines. But I think that there's one move that really stands out, and that's the move bishop b5, which is a very easy move, and it secures white some opening advantage. I think a6 is necessary here. He takes on d4 is going to be queen d4. Bishop g5 is also a thing in some lines. Let's say black goes here, takes, and here the accurate move is not to take on f6, but play knight e3. Attack the bishop on g4. I think it makes sense for black to keep the pin alive. We play short castle. I think the black has to accept it. Take on e5. And it's not very obvious for black that the best move here is queen d7. Yeah, you literally have to know this, because if he plays d5, suddenly after c4 he has problems with the pawn. There's also queen a4 stuff happening, and black might have some problems with the queen side. If black plays bishop e7, suddenly there's knight f5. We walk away from the pin. Queen c3. Watch out for some checkmate ideas on g7. White is just better. Let's check the queen d7 move. The idea, I think it's some knight g5 stuff, so that there's no g4 response from the white's perspective. But black never gets to this, because we take on d6, rook e1, and it's quite easy for black to make a mistake here, because should castle is still knight e5. The queen and h5 is the threat, and black ends up having a worse position. And according to an engine, the best move is long castle, which feels very risky, very double-edged, because queen e2 targets the pawn on a6, king b7, knight c4, and I feel that white has very serious threats, like bishop e3, etc. Even though black is also kind of threatening something at the king side. I like white's position. That's why, yeah, I wouldn't really worry about this bishop g4 too much. If black plays bishop e7, this is where you get to transpose to some of the lines we already looked at. Again, it's the knight e7 line. We get a good version of the King's Indian defense. Queen e7, d5, knight b8, and bishop d3. So here the point is, if black plays short castle, we can stop any bishop g4 or knight g4 stuff, h3, knight e7, bishop e3. I think also it makes perfect sense for you to play it like a classical King's Indian defense, c4 and bishop c2. You should not allow black to trade his knight for your Lasco bishop. But this is like a very concrete line. Knight c5 is bishop c5. Let's say black plays b6, knight c5, takes, queen f3, you go for a long castle, and at least according to an engine, white's chances are better. Nothing is happening at the queen side. You're going to play h4, h5, open up the king side, and this position is in white's favor. He could also play knight e7, bishop e3, and this is where maybe a mixed up actually. This was the game where Danya played against Daniel Bogdan Diak, against MVL, against Arjun and Regaisi. But I mean, these lines are so similar, you have to pardon me. Knight c5, this is his game against Diak. Takes, check, takes, short castle, and the white is just better. White simply enjoys a very nice positional advantage. And Regaisi and MVL, I think they played exactly like this. Knight g4, provocation of f6, bishop d2. And for example, Arjun, he played knight c5, h3, takes it, and here white just enjoys a better position. The most accurate move is b4, takes, queen g5, g3, and maybe black is holding on, but objectively he is worse. And according to an engine, the best continuation for black is to play f5. E takes on f5 is going to be e4. But knight g5 takes, shoot castle, and white simply has a wonderful position. And there's a very nice concept, shoot castle, h3, and instead of the classical c4, I really like this move, a4, walk away with the bishop, keep the bishop here on the board, rook a3, and bishop g4 with a very complex middle game, but ultimately the better chances for white. I mean, engine quite doesn't like this bishop e7 in general. I mean, engine doesn't like the kings in the defense anyway. But yeah, white is doing fantastic. I also probably should show what happens if black takes on d5 and takes on d4. This is not a draw, even though we have traded a couple of pieces. Black has problems to complete development. Bishop e7 drops the pawn on g7 with no compensation. Queen e7 and bishop e3, queen e5 is something that several Daniel's opponents try to play against him, but this check is very difficult to meet. And either black king walks, or actually I think it walks anyway, either with the bishop trade or without the bishop trade. For example, bishop d7, takes, check here, and yeah, here I think engine was saying some c4, rook d1, +2 for white. I don't know, long castle feels very human. I think this was also one of Naroditsky's games, and black objectively is lost. And ultimately we are going to the main continuation, which is e takes on d4, knight takes on d4. As we discussed a couple times, taking on d5 and d4, black is simply getting a worse position. We can immediately disregard knight e4. Yeah, knight b5, that's the threat. There's a fork, black cannot stop it. Maybe black can play bishop d7 instead. I don't know, why would somebody play like this, stopping some bishop b5 stuff? And Daniel would play here a couple of times bishop g5. I think he was just not ready for the line and never got a chance to play it again. And again, he would take on e7 and play f3, but I think that this position objectively is a bit dangerous for white. Maybe he has some compensation because of the darks by bishop, but I don't think this is the best he can do. And that's why I improved his continuation. I suggest to play bishop e3. And I think, again, here for black, it's quite dangerous to accept the pawn. It's knight b5. Black has to deal with this with rook c8. And at least you can take on a7. I think there's some other interesting choices as well, but this is just good. Black has no time for b6 because of queen e2. And ultimately, it goes to like this. Queen e2, here, takes, queen e5, very annoying move. Black on the castle short, the bishop on e7 is hanging, and the white just has the better position. So, yeah, I think black cannot really take on e4 without consequences. And if he does something else like bishop e7, now you get the same idea that Daniel was trying to do. Without bishop g5, bishop e3, without losing a tempo. Takes, play f3, black has no time for d5. And if he goes here, queen d4, long castle, white is simply doing better. Instead of this, I think that most people, they're going to play here bishop e7. And we're going to play bishop b5. Black doesn't really have a choice. Bishop d7, knight f5. This is what Daniel played many times. Here the point is, knight takes on d5, it doesn't work. Meaning e takes on d5 would leave the knight on f5 hanging. Queen d5 just feels a bit soft. But knight g7 is very straightforward, I think. Bishop h6, black cannot save the knight on d5 because of a discovered check. The king of the fate will be left defenseless. Take on d5, anything wins here. And the most accurate move here is to stop queen g4, training the queens, is to play h3, queen h5, knight f5 with a swift victory. That's why after knight f5, black doesn't really have a choice. He has to take it. And I'm not entirely sure if black should include a6 or not here, because if he does include it, it doesn't really change a lot. Like we play bishop a4 first, b5, bishop b3, knight a5, and We still have some pressure. His queenside pawns are quite weakened. And again, it's the same idea here. This knight e7, queen e7, rook e1, queen d7, queen f3, followed by some bishop g5. That's a weakness in the long run. Black is suffering a bit. And if black plays something like short castle, we play short castle, and perhaps he plays knight e5. Again, we take on e7, and I wouldn't really call this an equal position. Engine says it is about equal position, but it feels that because of the bishop pair, white is having practical chances for an opening advantage. And instead of this, maybe a6 here. This is what Daniel was playing a couple of times. Bishop c6, same idea. Knight e7, rook e1, queen d3. Queen f3, by the way, also works great, in case you're wondering. And black is worried about bishop g5. He plays h6 as his game against Anand Sugirov, a 2600 level grandmaster from Russia. He played b3, followed by bishop b2, and enjoyed the large advantage. So I think this is like one of the simplest parts of the Naroditsky variation. Black is very solid, but after d4, he is always slightly worse. This is the best he can do. I mean, except of perhaps knight e4. Knight e4, bishop b5. But if you study that line and you study this line, I think you're really well equipped. All right, then we have one more part to cover, which is the bishop d6 and the sidelines, the final part. Let me see if I can select it. So let's talk about all kinds of sidelines. For example, why I think this is a really nice practical weapon, I mean, mostly at accelerated time controls, is that black doesn't even get to play Petrov against you. After knight f6, you play knight c3. And after knight c6, we just transpose to knight e5 to Naroditsky variation. And I wanted to show you this particular line where black can try to play bishop b4. And Naroditsky had a couple of games in the line. But this already is a pretty known solid advantage to white. Because you can take on e5, play knight e3. It feels like it's the Berlin variation with colors reversed. Black has to take it. Knight e4, bishop e2, and white just enjoys the bishop pair and has the better game. This is Naroditsky's game against Amin Tabatabai, another incredibly strong grandmaster. d6, and here you have to know this rearranging maneuver. Knight f4, the knight is getting to d5 eventually, bishop e3, h6, and the simplest one that you can do is play rook e1, bishop f1, guard your bishops, push back the knight, play for some space at the queen side, and bishop f2. It's a fantastic position, yeah? So white's going to play something like queen e2, rook d1, knight e5, go for the endgame, and the bishop pair gives you the better chances. This is one sideline. Another line is, okay, let's stick to knight c6, knight c3. Maybe black knows that the Naroditsky variation is coming and he's desperately trying to avoid it. By the way, at the competitive level, like I know this definitely, the four knights is generally feared by black. If black is a much higher rated player, he's generally afraid of the four knights because after knight f6, it leads to this very famous drawing position. Takes, bishop e4, knight c6, bishop d3. It's very easy to learn this. And that's why sometimes very strong players from black's perspective, they're in despair as soon as they see knight c3. And the funny story is this, I was once playing in, this was several years ago, in the French Team Chess Championships, highest division, and I was playing against Andrei Yesepenko. Now he is a candidate, right? And I played e4, he played e5, and I had never played knight c3, the four knights variation, and he was so unhappy to see knight c3. We finished the game in a draw, and after the game, Andrei said that I'm literally like the third case very recently where somebody who has never played the Four Knights Variation against him, specifically against Yesipenko, plays the Four Knights Variation. Anyway, yeah, so I did not play the Naroditsky Variation back then. So yeah, what else does black have here? For example, bishop c5, it's a dubious choice because we can play knight e5, which is a pretty common maneuver here. And bishop f2 is just completely wrong because even though you cannot castle, you have a massive center, you have the bishop pair, and black's position is just really dubious. If he takes on e5 with the knight, takes bishop d3, this bishop on e5 is not well placed, and this is Danya's one of his games. Should castle d6, knight e2, lovely maneuver, threatening to trap the bishop. f4, bishop f6, knight g3, threatening to go here. And there's the following maneuver that you have to know, that you can play e5, d takes, play knight e4. Black, I think he needs to guard the Darkspawn bishop, otherwise he's going to have massive problems with the Darkspawn weaknesses. And here I improve Danya's game, where he played f takes on e5 and bishop g5, which is not the best, according to an engine at least, but f5. We borrowed this idea from the modern Benoni. We threaten to play bishop g5. If black plays here, takes, and black is in trouble. Yeah, so this is the best that black can do. e4, bishop e3, here. And even though it looks very symmetrical, objectively, black's position is really shaky. He has problems to complete the development of the queen side, and his king is also feeling very vulnerable. It's something like +1, according to an engine. So bishop c5 is just not a good move. And sometimes when people are desperate, they see that white plays the Four Knights Variation, they try to play g6 and just to avoid all of this. But now you can play d4, e takes on d4 and knight e4, and engine hates this position from black's perspective. Bishop g7, bishop e3, and we are about to castle the long side. If black decides to play knight g7, this is a very simple plan. The threat is to play h4, h5, bishop h6, go for checkmate. We borrowed this idea from the Sicilian Dragon. d6, h4, h5, here, here. Very nice, relieve the tension from the center, remove the defender, takes. And the simplest continuation here for white is to play bishop e2, g4, and black is in big trouble. He cannot defend the king with queen f6 because there's always going to be knight e5. I have no idea what black is supposed to do. So I would look in the direction like this, some f4, h5, and the initiative basically just flies itself. The other continuation that black sometimes tries in these positions is knight f6. This is very important, knight c6. We play e5. Black doesn't have access to knight g4. He goes back. And here the most popular move in the position, and also the top choice of the engine, is to play f4. Black plays knight h6, and he kind of says, I have some counterplay. But you know what Naroditsky was playing in this position more than once? Queen d2, which is not like the top choice of the engine, but it's very unpleasant for black, because it pretty much forces him to take the pawn on e5. Because if black takes the pawn on e5, we play long castle, and let's say he plays d5, we simply complete development, we start to push the pawns to the king side. Very difficult for black to play this. Let's say here, g4, take away some squares, f4, bishop c5, h4, +1 according to an engine. We're down a pawn, but black's position is just bad. And if black instead maybe tries to somehow control better squares with d6, bishop c4, rook e1 is incoming, very nasty threat, h4, h5 is incoming, here, and here. I mean, knight e4 gives a large advantage to white, but again, we have this thematic rook sacrifice, sacrifice 2 rooks for the queen. Black is in trouble because the king is exposed, and if he plays bishop e5 and d takes on e5, he's not going to survive this. Bishop f4, rook d8, queen b4, rook e5 is incoming. The king is so exposed, it's a very little price to pay for a sacrificed exchange. And yeah, there was this one game that Danya played against Molecular Chemist, some 2900 rated guy, probably a GM. Black played 97, castles, just bishop h6. Same idea. Takes, black played d5, there's 94, knight f6 is coming here, and here Danya just mopped up the game with knight f6 check, queen, sacrifice, takes on f6, extra exchange, and the rest was very easy for Daniel. That's why this avoiding the 4 knights variation, black doesn't really have any choices here. I don't know what black's supposed to do. Let's say black plays knight f6. We're still playing the Naroditsky variation, 95. And there's one more line we have to check. What happens if black plays bishop d6, which is a very solid choice, which looks a bit weird. I think black would have to know this beforehand. And Daniel here liked bishop c4 a lot. But you can also play d4, which is a bit more peaceful. And again, for black, it's very dangerous to accept a pawn like this, here. And it's not bishop g5, but it's take on f6, bishop g5, and black has big problems with the piece coordination. Let's say here, bishop d2, rook e1. Again, he has some problems. The queen is so, and the bishop, they're so awkwardly placed in this position. But after d4, black can take on d5. Take on d5, knight e4, and it just leads to this position. I don't know if here white has realistically anything. Rook e8, long castle. Maybe we can stir up things to the king side, some h4 stuff, h4, h5, black plays c5, takes. It's about level. Yeah, so I'll leave it up to you if you want. But Danya, he was typically playing bishop c4. And it's a bit gambling. Because if black doesn't accept the pawn on e4 now, then we're good. Let's say shoot castle, d3, and we get some sort of a typical Italian game. Like bishop c5, castle, c3, etc. A couple of knights have been traded. All the typical Italian plans follow. If you want to know them, check out my bootcamp, the Italian game, whichever number it was, I already forgot, 40 plus something. But if black tries to be very creative with knight e7 and knight g6, he might get in trouble with h4, h5. Right. The principal continuation, though, is knight x on e4. And here, Danya would play d4, should castle, and he would typically play here, should castle. But I'm not sure about this, because I definitely see that there are some tricks. For example, e takes on d4 is a mistake. Rook e1, rook e8, and suddenly white just develops killing attack with knight g5. Bishop g5. Bishop g5. How do you defend? Knight g5, takes, knight g5. And after knight e5, here apparently white has a fascinating way to win this, which if you don't know, you will basically never spot. So the idea is to play f4. Sacrifice the bishop to play queen d3. And as it turns out, you can't defend the pawn. Like g6 is a fork on f6. The best that black can do is f5. There's queen c4. Black walks away. And we just casually sacrifice a knight. Knight e7, knight f7. Oh, this looks really bad. And yeah, the best that black can do here is to give up the queen, which is a losing position. Yeah, it's a fascinating line, but the problem is that black doesn't have to fall for this, and knight e4 makes a bit more sense because it allows black to play c6 next. Takes, rook e1, but there's a devilish trap, and Danya did try this in, I think, in at least one game. Bishop takes an h2, it looks so tempting, but it's not the best move. The point is, obviously, king h2 is queen h4, queen f2, queen h4. Black can at least agree to a draw, but I think he should push for more. c6, d5 with a large advantage for black. But instead of this, white has a shocking move, king f1. And now this position is really wild because if black plays c6, we take it, we take it. I don't know what to make of this position. Yeah, the bishop on h2 is stuck. Yeah, engine says it's about equal. I don't know, I think the better player is going to win. Or maybe black plays queen h4. I think this was one of Danya's games. Trying to put a checkmate. Queen d4, do not blunder the queen. Knight g3, the queen is gone. But there's queen f3. And here black made a mistake. Yeah, knight x and f2. He wanted to play bishop g3 next, but it just fails because of the intermezzo. Check. Black is just close to lost. But I mean, the entire line is totally playable for black if he had picked up the scary move rook e8. Bishop d3, and now sacrifice the knight like this. And according to the Silicon Beast, after the very precise knight e7, this position is just unclear. All right. Yeah, this is really crazy. Yeah, after shook castle, takes, rook e1, black doesn't have to do this. And also, by the way, rook e8 is a very nice mistake because we can play queen f3, knight c5, and this is probably one of the nicest combinations of the entire Naroditsky variation. White to play and win. If you want, you can pause the video to figure it out, but yeah, I'm gonna show you. Knight f6, queen f6 drops the rook on e8, g takes and f6. There's another double exclam move, bishop f7, queen h5, and that's it. Black is toast. That's it. Mate on the board. Beautiful. It's really beautiful. But it's a problem. I mean, beauty comes at a price, I suppose. I'm black and play knight c5, and c6 is incoming. It does look a bit scary, but queen d4, knight e6, queen g4, c6. Black is pushing back white's pieces. Knight e3, bishop c7, knight f5, g6, and objectively white is worse. So I'll leave it up to you to decide if this risk is worth it. Maybe it is. It definitely gives you a chance to play some memorable games. But I found another move which looks really fun. And I'm pretty sure that if Danya was among us, he would have picked it up at some point anyway, which is the move h4. The threat is to play some bishop g5 or knight g5. Really, really modern stuff. And if black takes it, we play bishop g5. Black cannot take on g5. We take it, and according to an engine, this position is lost for black. Queen d3, attack the pawn, you cannot defend it, g6 is knight f6, goodbye. And after bishop g5, if black plays bishop e7, we play bishop d3, silly, I don't know where black is supposed to put the knight. There's some very concrete problems, some tactical threats with the pawn on h7, some Greek gifts with knight g5, bishop h7, queen h5, etc. And black goes here. I don't know, it's some kind of a mess. Takes here. We casually sacrifice a queen. Takes here. Bishop e2 with super unclear position. And Stockfish says that black is slightly better. Black picks up king e6. Yeah, good luck with that. I think from a practical standpoint, the positions are really fun. But I mean, after bishop g5, black would have to pick up the best move, queen e8. Show castle, king h8 to play f6. Here, f5. I don't know what is this. Queen g6, and I stopped to analyze this because I saw obviously that Stockfish doesn't like the position from white, but it looks very dynamic. Yeah, maybe it makes sense to push this line a bit deeper. White is down to pawns, but definitely has a lot of fun. All right. Those are the all 6 parts. And let's arrive to a conclusion. So what do I think about the 4 knights variation? I have to confess, I did not even know that this was Daniel's pet weapon until I started to investigate. And I got the word when I was asking my followers on YouTube which bootcamp should I do next. they told me that I should do Danya's for knights, and I didn't know what it is. Yeah, and then they would educate me. It's knight e5. There's also, by the way, the Gleck variation with g3. I didn't really check if Danya is playing this. It's a totally different system. It's maybe a bit more peaceful, but the bottom line is that knight e5 is really fun, and I would definitely love to play this myself a couple of times. I don't know if I would play this in a highly competitive classical tournament game where it really mattered. I would definitely love to play this as an element surprise. I will play this in some accelerated time control games, but ultimately, I think that white is doing very much fine in all the lines, and even in this very critical knight e4, d4. I don't know, do you take it? It's so risky for black to play this. Engine doesn't fully understand this. And the main line is this: d6, bishop b5, a6, bishop a4, b5, bishop b3, knight a5. And if you study it very carefully, you have at least an equal position in your pocket. So I think that the bottom line is it's well worth it. And it gives you a lot of tactical possibilities. And with Danya, him being such a speed demon, basically, he played a blitz chess so rapidly, so quickly, and he was very good at flagging the opponents. For him, extracting the extra 1 minute away from the clock, try to solve the problems, then he would always rely on his speed. And I think this line was essentially one of the catalysts, one of the reasons why he was so highly ranked. But maybe it only takes Danya to play this line. I don't know. But I think that the line deserves some very serious attention. And I wish more people, they're going to play this. And that his legacy also, by playing this variation, is going to live on. So this is where I'm going to wrap up my bootcamp. Hope you enjoyed it. Leave a comment. What do you think about it? And I would also, once again, like to encourage you to, in case you haven't done it, to ensure that Danya's legacy lives on, consider supporting his memorial fund. You can do it also by purchasing the PGN of this bootcamp, as all the sales, at least until the campaign is running, I don't know how I could transfer it after the campaign is done, until at least the campaign is running for at least 6 weeks, all of the income from the sold PGNs is going to go straight to the Daniel Naroditsky Memorial Foundation. And also, already, as I said at the very beginning, I will be playing myself in the Naroditsky Memorial 3rd to 5th July in Charlotte. Many famous, if not all of the famous content creators are going to be there, including Hikaru Nakamura and Gotham Chess. So if you want to see me in person and also honor Danya's legacy, consider going to Charlotte. This is the tournament and place to be in the year 2026. That's it. Thank you for watching this, and have a great day.